Hey there, welcome to this lecture. In the previous lecture, we have seen how we can apply the solid principle and the clean architecture in our application. And we have refactored our code and revoked all of the tightly coupled dependencies. As an example, you can see right now our controller is totally free of all of these tight coupling dependencies. So we can directly inject the dependency injections in order to get the job done, right? And similar applies for all of the other source code as well. So now we're going to write some test cases in order to take the advantages of how we can, with the help of this clean architecture, we can test each and every feature of each layer. And right before writing the test cases, let's try to understand what are the types of the test we are going to write in our application. So there are two types of test cases. One is the integration test, which is going to help us out to start to end whole application test. And another one is going to be the unit test, which is potentially, it's very helpful to evaluate or writing the test cases for test the business logic. So in our case, we're going to write the unit test, right? Maybe in a later stage, while our whole application, all the modules are ready, then maybe we are going to write some integration test as well as, right? Now let's go to our package.json file, and you can see we don't have any kind of settings or maybe libraries which is going to support us to write the test cases or run the test cases, right? So what we will be going to do, we will install a couple of libraries. Let's try to close this file. And here in the terminal, we're going to use the jest and super test for running our test cases, right? So in this case, we can say yarn at jest, and we'll be going to use the Babel as well as a form of preset. So let's try to install all of the dependencies to support our test cases, right? Perfect. So it is installed successfully. Now let's try to close this terminal here. Now let's go to our package.json file. And here you can see some of the new libraries has been installed. Babel preset env, and we're going to use the pin version. So what is pin version? Already I have explained, right? So a pin version, that means we are going to particularly use this particular version only, right? And let's try to remove this caret symbol from here and here as well as, right? And finally from the super test. Cool. And while we're going to run our test cases, then inside this script, we are going to add one more script. This is going to be test, and we will going to say jest, right? Perfect. So our package.json file is configured successfully. Now let's go ahead here in the root directory of the application, and we will create one file. This is going to set our preset as a form of Babel. So let's try to create that particular file. This file name will be babel.rc, right? Babel.rc. So inside here, we are going to declare one object, and inside this object, we will add one key. This is going to be our presets, right? Presets, and presets will be our Babel preset env. So definitely we are not using React, then we can just remove this React part. Only this thing will be needed, right? Babel preset env, right? Now let's create another file. This is going to be our jest configuration, which is going to help us out to spin or run all of the test cases. So we can say jest.config.js. Okay. So inside this jest config.js file, we will export one module. This is going to be export default, right? So inside this object, we'll be going to add a couple of things. So we will define what kind of test environment we will be going to use, and what kind of transform or what kind of file system we will be going to consider for running the test cases. Those are the things we are going to edit right here. So in this case, we can set test environment, test environment, right? Test environment. This is not JS DOM. This is going to be Node, right? Then we need to use the transform. Right? Transform will be our one object. So what kind of file we are going to support, that is where we need to mention. So right now only we are going to use the JS. That's why let's change it to JS, right? So now this is not going to be TS just. This is going to be our Babel just, right? Because we are using Babel in this case. So now our configuration is done. Then we can go ahead and write some test cases. Let's try to close this file here, and let's go to our repository. So here inside this user repository, we will create one directory. This is going to be __test underscore, right? So why this directory is needed? Because with the help of this directory, we will keep all of the test file related to all of the repositories. Today, we have only user repository. Maybe tomorrow we are going to add a couple of more, let's say product, or maybe orders, or maybe notifications. So any form of like whatever the modules we will be introducing here, all of the test file we will keep inside the test. So by keeping this kind of directory structure for the test, this is really very helpful while it comes to test our third-party libraries, just like AWS SDK, or maybe similar kind of the payment SDKs or something like that, right? So those things we can just like with the help of this kind of convention, it's going to be really helpful, right? But it's really up to you. And so whatever suits at you, maybe you can just keep in outside of this test directory, also in the root directory inside repositories. But I'm always recommending to use something like this way, so you can find your all of the test file inside one place, right? So here inside this test directory, we'll be going to create one file. This is going to be our user repository, user.test.js. So can you see, like, as soon as we are added the .test, the postfix, right before the file extension, then the file icon has been changed. So this is the way our Zest is always. It's going to be easily find out like what kind of file we're going to use for the test, right? All right, so now here in the user repository.test file, we'll be going to write some test. But before that, let's try to import our user repository.js file, because this is the actual implementation file that is we'll be going to use for to test our all of the test cases. You can see, like, while we will be going to test all of the features, just like create user, get user by email, get user by ID, and rest of all functions, then you can see we need to use this query as a kind of dependency injection, right? So this is what we are going to mock it to test it out all of the feature. So let's try to import this one, right? This is going to be like import. So make sure while we are importing this one, right, we need to use this user repository.js extension also, because we are using ES6 syntax here, right? So this is going to be like user repository from user repository.js. Perfect. So now let's try to write some test cases. But before writing the test cases, let's make it like group all of the test cases in together one test suite, right? So we are going to use the Zest. So Zest is providing a very suitable and nice keyword that is called describe, so which is potentially going to group all of the edge cases together, right? So let's try to do that way. Right. So here you can see we are using describe to group all of the test cases, all of the edge cases. It's going to be like fall into this user repository test suite, right? So here, first of all, let's try to form our dependencies, right? So first dependency will be our query, right? Right. So query will be going to use like as a form of dependencies, just like if you see here in this query, this is a kind of you can say PostgreSQL or maybe any kind of SQL form of a function that is we have already created here inside this DB directory, DB operation. Can you see this one, right? So where it's going to be pool involved, right? This pool is coming from our PostgreSQL, but in our case, while we are going to write the test cases, then we'll be going to simply use the Zest function, which is mimicking like all of the PostgreSQL related or maybe SQL related all of the functionality. That is what we are going to do. Second dependency, we'll be going to use this user repository as a form of dependency. All right, so let's try to use user repo. So we'll be going to write some test cases just to check it out whether our test configuration, as we see here, the Zest config and Babel RC we have added. So all of the configurations are on place or not correctly. We will be going to run some very kind of like teeny tiny tests to make sure everything is working well, right? So in this case, let's say create, right? Or maybe we can say test, right? Test create user, right? So inside here, this test case, we'll be going to write a very simple expectation. We will set our expectation. We can say expect, right? So inside expectation, we will be saying 1 plus 1 to be 2, right? So if you see this expectation, this expect keyword also, it's a kind of form of function which is going to evaluate like whatever the provided condition. And after that, there's a kind of chain function we'll be going to use. If you're going to put dot notation, you'll be able to see like whatever the chain whatever the available function that is we can evaluate by providing this particular condition, right? So expect exactly it is working as a kind of evaluation functions, providing that particular input, and it will going to compare like whatever the expected, whatever the provided input, it has to be matched with the expectation. That is what exactly it is saying, right? So you can say to be equal to, right? So 1 plus 1 to be equal to. So this is very easy test. Definitely it's going to be passed, that's for sure. If our configuration is correct, then it has to be passed correctly. Now let's go to our terminal and let's try to run this test, right? So yarn test. Okay, so hopefully this is going to be like, it says describe. Maybe we have mistyped this one, right? You can see like we can say describe, right? Describe. So now let's try to run it once again. Perfect. Can you see right now it is passed? Now let's go ahead and construct these two dependencies. So while we are going to run the test cases, then every time we are going to run any kind of test, there is a kind of dependency we need to construct, like query we need to assign or construct, and user repository also we need to construct. But this is really going to be tedious thing, right? So we need to put all of the code like right before running this test. So just is providing some helper function. This is called before each, which is going to execute right before running the test. So let's try to use the before each. You can say before each, right? And inside before each, we'll be going to put like set up our query and user repository. So we will be going to say this is a kind of function, and inside this function we will say query, right? Query will be just function, and user repo will be user repository, and we are providing this query right here. So that means user repository needs some kind of query, and this query will be having all of the required like the mimicking function that is we can just like consider right there, right? So this is perfect now. Now let's go ahead and create a test like create user functionality. So while we are just creating the user, then definitely we need to prompt some kind of input. So we can say const input, right? So input, we can just provide some kind of name as a form of like, let's say Zondo or something like that. Like it's up to you what kind of data you are providing here. There are some utility helper tools also there. It's called Packer or maybe similar kind of stuff, which is going to generate the mock or maybe fake data. But as of now, let's try with some data or something like that. Like as an example, Zondo you can use, and email we can say test@test.com. Right? Then maybe password also we need to provide, right? So we can say password will be, let's say, password, right? Then rule will be, let's say, user, right? So this is the input where we'll be going to pass it on to our create user, right? Then we can say const, we need to prompt like expected result also. So what is the expected result? That is, we'll be going to pass it to our query, because you can see like while we will be going to call our function. Let's try to call our function here. Let's say const the result will be our await, right? User repo create user input. So this is what exactly we are going to call. If you go to user repository, you can see our create user we are calling by providing all of this input, right? Then this expectation or this particular DB query is going to be execute, and it will going to return this value. But as of now, if we are going to call this function, this input is perfectly fine. And this create user, right? This user repository, you can see already we have declared in global scope of inside this describe function. And this is assigning the user repository by using this mock query function. This is a form of like just function, right? So that means like this query, we can assign whatever, or you can mimic whatever our PostgreSQL or our pool, right? If you go here, maybe right here, so inside query, inside then, or whatever we are going to execute, that is, we can mimic right here, right before calling this particular function. That means like while we'll be going to create user, then our query going to take care of mimicking that particular behavior, then we can have the expected result. That is what we're going to do right here, right? So now let's try to form a kind of mock result right here. We can say mock response, or maybe you can say mock response or mock db result, db result. And inside this db result, we'll be going to say, we can say id. Here object will be there, id will be 1, right? Then rest of all the input. So whatever input we are provided here, right? This input to create, additionally, we will be having the ID will be there, and some of the, like all of the rest of data, it has to be assigned right there. Now, this is the expectation we will be expect from our result here. So now let's try to mimic that thing with the help of query. So we can say query mock result value will be our DB result, right? This is what query going to be resolved. So now let's go ahead, and here we will check it out. What are the expectation? This expectation will be no more available here. Then we can say expect, right? Expect. Then we can say result. Result will be 2 equal, and the mock result, the first response, like this is the thing which is we are expecting from here, right? First of all, let's try to run the test. We will see like whether it is able to success or not, right? So maybe what we can do, we can just like print it out the result also. We can say console.log create user result, right? Now let's go ahead here and try to run the test, yarn test. So now can you see the test is fast, right? Because whatever the expected behavior that is already we said here, this is the input, all right? This is the mock result. We should supposed to pass it right there, and we expect that the result from the create user has to be returned something like this result, right? This is what we said. And we saw like while the actual function it's got called, right? So our query, this particular mock query, it already taken care of like what will be the return value. That is we saw here as a kind of printed value. It says like create user result, ID 1, and rest of other input that is we have provided. So now like how we can just like write the test cases and how we can resolve that particular thing by using mimicking that behavior from the query, right? Now let's go ahead and add maybe a couple of more expectation here. We can say here expected, right? So expect query have been called with like all of the value. Like this query have been called with insert into user's name and etc. and value will be all of these inputs, whatever inputs we are setting it up right there. Now let's try to run the test once again. We're going to say yarn test. Now can you see both of the scenario has been passed, because this particular function, right? This particular function, this create user, it's already been called with the insert into this one, right? That is exactly executing from here. You can see this one. So only we are mimicking like this query. So query has to return this data, but rest of other stuff it has to execute accordingly. So that is what we are testing it out. Now let's go ahead and write all of the test cases quickly. Then maybe we can go one by one all of these things. Now let's try to cover what we did here. So you can see like we have covered the create user, and now if you go here in the get all users, you can see inside get all users we are forming one mock user response. That is we are going to return from our database, right? So you can see this query we are resolving from mock result value. So we are mimicking like these are the data. It is coming from our PostgreSQL. That is what we are mimicking here using mock result value by passing this all the data. Then while we're going to call this actual function of the user repository get all users, then what it will going to do, if you go to the actual function of this one user repository get all users, then it is going to call our PostgreSQL by using this query, right? Select start from users, right? And then it will going to return whatever data it is stored right there for all the users. It will going to return everything, right? So expectation is something like that way only. So we are comparing again, like once we are calling this actual function, this data has to be equal to the result, right? And while our actual function has to call, then make sure our query it is getting called with this particular using this particular query. This is what exactly we are doing, right? So if really this function is getting called, then this particular the query has to be it has to be executed in our PostgreSQL, right? So this is what we are expecting right there. So let's try to prove it like while we're going to call this function, it is really actually getting called, and it is calling with this one and plus this, something like that. So what we can do, let's try to put a kind of console.log, and first of all what we will going to do, we will say the expected actual result, right? Then we can say this on stringify, and the actual result will be our rest, right? Then what this query it is exactly, that is also we can check it out right here. So let's try to put another console log here. Log, we can say maybe query, right? So directly we can say something like this, query. So let's check it out. Like if really it's going to call, then we will be having some kind of printout of this one and along with this one as well as. So now let's go here. But if we're going to run the test cases, then all the test cases will get run. Let's say create user also will get run and rest of other. So while only we are intended or only we're interested to run a particular test case, then just is providing some kind of like beautiful keyword, right? So it's called only. So let's try to put this like test only. Then this test only, what it will do, it will skip rest of all the test cases. It will only consider this particular test, right? So now let's go to our terminal, right? So here we are going to run yarn test, right? So now can you see the rest of all the test cases are skipped. Now it is only running this get all users. And if you see carefully, the get this particular get all users test, and this is the function exactly which is we are technically try to log in right there, right? So here you can see we are logging here this one, right? This query, and this query is a kind of mock function. Can you see? This is a kind of mock function, and it has all of the attributes, all of the values. So which is we are potentially mimicking like what kind of behavior we are looking from the actual maybe function or maybe library or something that is we can do, right? And if you see a little bit down here, actual result that is coming from our database, that is saying like user ID this one, email and this is first user object, and this is second user object. That is what exactly we're pushing it from here, all right? So this one. So now you got the clue, right? So how exactly the zest is working, how mocking is working, and how we can test the application actual behavior by using something like this way, right? So now let's go to user repository. Let's try to remove all of these things. Maybe this one also not required. This one also not required, right? And now let's try to remove this one also, right? Now let's go to the next test suite. So here, get user by ID. So get user by ID, what we are looking for, well, we'll be going to call this actual get user by ID. Then we need to provide one user ID. That is, we are going to pass it right here, and the expected result has to be something like this. That is what we are resolving right here. And while our query is going to resolve, it's a form of array. If you see here in the user repository, let's say go to get user by ID. Can you see this is a kind of form of this query? It is resolving as a form of array, right? But that's a different story. We are returning the first index, but this query has to return form of array. So that is what we are doing right here. We are just returning form of array because from the query. Then actual function, it has to return this object. So that's why we are comparing, like results would have to be matched with our mock users, and query have been called with select star from users by the first argument. That is exactly the one, right? And that is the expectation. Now let's try to check it out, the update user. So update user, you can see input is something like this, right? So this is the input exactly, and this is the mock user, right? And while we are returning the mock user, then it has to be returned something like this. Maybe we can add like, let's say password, right? Password will be, let's say password. So we are pretending like this mock user will be coming from our database, right? So this is the input, which is we are trying to set it from our client, or maybe like while we are going to execute this update user, then this is the input we are going to provide, right? And right after change the modification, as an example, this is our name, which is we are trying to changing out, and this is the email ID, right? And this is the rule, right? And eventually right after at the modification, then the expected result has to be something like this, right? And we are just try to check it out right after calling this actual function, the update user, by providing all this input, and equal to result has to be equal to mock user, right? This one. Then we are checking it out, like whether if this query is getting called while we are going to update our user, it has to call this particular SQL syntax also, right? So update user set name equal to 1, email equal to, rule equal 3, and where ID equal to 4. So let's try to check it out, like whether we have the similar syntax or not, right? So let's try to maybe we can just like grab this piece of code from here and make sure we're aligned with this, right? Something like this. Okay, here we are setting the password also. So maybe we can just like consider the password, but yeah, that's perfectly fine. Maybe let's try to add the password also here. Password also, you can say password. Then our input email will be there, right? Input name will be there, email will be there. Then the rule here will be input.password, right? Input.password rule will be there, then input ID. So this ID will be this one, right? 1 2 3 4 5. Perfect. 1 2 3 4 5. Perfect. Then now let's go to our delete user. And delete user also very simple, because while we're going to delete the user, it will not going to return any value, because it's already deleted from the database, right? That is what our query should supposed to return. And result will be something like this, like while we're going to call this delete actual delete user, then we are going to provide this the ID right there, and result has to be true. Like while it's supposed to delete that particular data, then it has to be return true, right? So by looking at the expected behavior, like while we're going to return like a res count will be greater than 0, right? So this is what we are doing. Maybe we can check it out, like while we're calling this one, whatever it is returning, it has to expect something like this, right? And maybe what we can do, let's try to move this delete user to at the bottom, because that is the last operation we are going to do, right? So maybe we can just like move this get user by email to right after get user by create user right after this one, because anyway we are going to use the login. So this is the first query, this is the first feature, maybe right after create, right? So now let's try to discuss this one as well as. So get user by email is the similar, just like we did for get user by ID. So here we are forming a mock response, right? Mock user here, and we're resolving from our database, and we're calling that particular data by using the test@test.com. This is the email ID, and expected result has to be similar, just like a mock user has to be, the expected result has to be equal to mock user. And finally, expected query is select star from users. Email will be this particular placeholder value, right? Then finally the delete user is the same, right? So you can see like we have covered accordingly. So now this is the time where we are going to run the test cases, and if anything is break, then we will be going to resolve together, right? So now let's go ahead here. Now we can say yarn test. Perfect. So it is going through, right? Only there are two issues. So one is like update user has some issues, and delete user also has some issues. So one by one, let's try to fix those issues. So it says cannot read property undefined reading name, right? So in the update user, maybe somehow we not be able to fix this like name, because you can see update user having two types of data. First parameter will be ID, second parameter will be our object. That is what we missed right there, right? So let's go to our update user. So this time what we will do, let's try to fix one by one. So in that case, maybe we can consider something like this only. So unnecessarily if we are going to run all the test cases, then definitely the error, it's going to be hard for us to debug, right? So let's assume right now we have only 5 or 6 test cases. So if you have plenty of test cases, then every time it's going to run your test cases, it's going to take a lot of time. So that is what we're trying to save using this only. Then here, if you see this input is perfectly fine, right? So let's go to here, and here in the first object we don't have the ID right there. So that means while we are going to use the input, then this ID we will just like keep it explicitly as an example. We can say const ID will be 1, right? This is ID will be 1. Then we can fairly pass this one. Here we can say ID, and second object will be this input object, right? And while we are checking it out the result, then mock user has to be similar, just like something like this, right? Now I think it's perfectly fine, but this is not going to be input ID. This is directly you can say ID. Now let's go ahead and try to run this particular test. Right? Run test. Can you see? Now it is passed. Right. So now let's go ahead and fix it out the rest other one also. So here we're going to put remove this only here, and we are going to put only right here. Right. So now here we can say yarn test. Alright, so now let's try to handle this delete user. So you can say like what is the log says it says like expected is true, but receive is false, right? So why so? If you see here closely a little bit, the query mock result, we're resolving one empty array, right? And we're expecting this result to be true, right after calling this delete user. So if you go here, let's try to close this one. If you go to delete user here, right, maybe go to delete user from user repository, and if you see here, you can see while we're calling this query, then it is returning some kind of parameter. It's called res row count. And the what is difference between the other functions? If you see here on the, let's say, update user or maybe get user or something like that, other one. So it has one array, and inside that array will be having the value. But delete user will be having like, directly response has the row count. That is what we are missing here. So that means while we are resolving this delete user, then make sure we are providing this row count value, right? So let's go to user repository instead of this array. So we can directly kind of say like, let's try to make a kind of object here. We can say row count. Row count will be at least 1, right? So this is what the expectation, row count greater than at least 0, right? Now let's go ahead and run this particular test suite. And test. Perfect. Can you see? Now it is passed. So this is the way we can cover all of the expectations. Let's try to remove all of these things from here, and let's try to run all the test cases. So yarn test. Cool. All of the test cases got passed. And there's one more thing we can improve. You can see like all of the test cases we have used just like by using the function name, right? So this is really very cool thing. So if your function name is create user, make sure you are using similar principle right here. Let's go to here, and test suite name will be create user. And this similar applies for get user by email, let's say. All right, so let's go here, get user by email. So it has to same. So that is the way you can just like determine like which function we have just like tested from the user repository, right? But this is not enough for writing test cases. So while it comes to the covering edge cases, this is only the aggregated like happy path, right? So in that case, what we can do, maybe we can just like group. This is the way we did for like describe the user repository. The similar way we can just like create another one for grouping this particular function. Just like maybe create user can have maybe more than one scenarios. It can successfully create the user, and it can fail also. So how we can add all of those things? So in that case, we are going to use the describe, right? Describe function, right? And inside describe, we can say create user, right? Create user. Then we are going to say async, right? And inside async, we'll be going to put all of these test cases right there, right? So let's try to move this test create user. This one, we can just like move it from here, right? This is going to be suit again, and this is going to be our test case. So this time what we will going to do, we're going to say instead of the create user, so user, right? Yeah, we can say create user successfully, and this time you can use like maybe sentence case or something like this way, and user successfully, and return, right? And return successful, and return user object. So this is the test scenario from our create user. Now let's go ahead and just like try to run it, right? Yarn test. Right, so maybe this must be defined synchronously. So what we did here sync, right? Maybe we can just like put something like this, right? So I think yarn test. Perfect. So now it is got passed. So accidentally what I did, like I just like put async here also. So describe exactly, it's not required any kind of synchronous stuff, because all the test cases has to be executed right after like we are putting into kind of test suite, right? So now you can see like we have only one test case, and if you see in the console, it is clearly it is pretty explanatory. Like we have our user repository, we have this many of the test suites. And each test suite has one function. Let's say create user. Create user has a scenario, right? Maybe let's try to create another test case also here. We can say test, right? So in this case, we can say test suite, all right? Maybe create user should fail. fail if any internal error occur, right? So this is what we are expecting. So this time async again, and inside this particular test, what we are going to do. So here we are going to say the query reject value database error, let's say, right? Then what we are going to do, we'll be going to say, let's try to call const result will be user repo, say await user repo create user, and here we are just like sending some kind of like the value. That is not always mandatory. You need to just like put something like this, because why we created, we just try to maybe, and this is the way we can just like reuse this particular object. That's why we have added, but in this case we are not interested to reuse. Let's try to copy this piece of code here, and we can directly pass these things to right here, right? And our expected result has to be undefined, because this, if we have database error, it should not supposed to return any data, right? Result the catch error, right? So catch error will be something like this, right? So result catch error will be exactly something like this way, right? So let's try to run this particular test case. Let's assume we're only going to run this particular test suite. Here also you can put, all right, one single case also you can run. As an example, we can just like only interested to run this one. Let's try to run this whole test, right? Yarn test. Now it is throwing some kind of error, like, definitely we are going to resolve this one. What it says, it's not be able to like go through like this one, because it's throwing the error, all right? That's why it is not be able to execute the rest of all. Maybe the way we are writing the test, all right, this is a little bit different, right? So what we are going to do, let's try to remove all of the expectation from here. So this is perfectly fine while we are rejecting the error. We are saying like mock reject value will be database error. But while we are expecting these things, like what we need to do, we need to say instead of result, we are going to say await expect, right? Inside the expect only we are going to execute this piece of code, right? So we can say let's try to execute something like this. Then here we will say rejects, right? The expectation will be one more here, right? Then after that we are saying rejects. So what exactly we are rejects to throw, right? We can say throw, right, to throw, and the message we will be going to provide this message, right? Database error, right? So maybe we can just like pick it something like this, const the error message database error. This is the error message. We can just like pass it on here as well as then we can reuse right here, right? And this is the expectation should have to be fulfilled from our create user, like from this particular use case, right? So now let's try to run this one, test only, and this time it is supposed to pass. Can you see? Right now it is passed, right? So it is only tested like this particular test case. Now let's go ahead and remove this one, right? And let's try to run all the test cases. Cool. Now can you see everything has been successfully went through all of the test suites along with this test suite plus all the test cases. Like these are the two test cases we have covered here. So as a homework right now, go ahead and add rest of other, like maybe you can move this the test suite inside inside something like this, like maybe use describe create, then maybe add some scenarios there, right? So this is the form of homework for you. And in the next lecture, I'm going to cover the rest of other test cases just for controller, for user and repository, where we will see, because right now you can see in the query, it is only one single function. If you see in the database operation, it is just like, using the query only. There are nothing to do maybe using mock anything to inside, let's say query, create user, query, get user, there is nothing, right? That's why we are only just like, mimicking the query. But if you see in the service, user service, you can see while we are trying to test our user service, then we need to mock our create user, get user by ID. So how we can do that one? That is we can see in the next lecture, right? So far I believe like you know how to set up your test and how to write your test, how to configure your dependencies, right? And eventually we checked it out like how we can just add as many as test cases or edge cases, because one single function can have many edge cases. It can be successful, or what if if you're not providing some of the data, then that particular edge case also we need to cover. So this is the way. If something we're changing it right here in the actual functionality as a kind of side effect, maybe we're changing somewhere else. So this particular function should not supposed to have side effect. So that's why the test cases are really essential to write, and this is the way we can achieve the outcome from our source code. And to write this kind of test cases, make sure your application is well defined and it's well written, and their dependencies are handled nicely, right? So that's why we have implemented this clean architecture. And I'm encouraging you just to try to do this kind of example, maybe not this one, maybe some different project you can just create, set up it, all these things accordingly. Do as many as practice, then this is definitely it's going to burn in your memory, right? Perfect. Then see you in the next lecture. Thank you.